Hey everybody, Danielle Hargenrader here. Another episode of Unleash Your Inner Diabetes Dominator. Today I am beyond excited to bring you Asha Brown. And if for those of you who don't know Asha, I'm going to give you a little bio and then we're going to get right into it. So Asha is the founder of We Are Diabetes, and you can check that out at wearediabetes.org. She served as a member of the ADA Women and Diabetes Subcommittee and is also an active member of Diabetes Advocates. Asha has worked firsthand with families, patients, educators, and medical professionals across the USA. She strives to educate others about her personal experience with ED-DMT1, which is eating disorders, right? Diabetes mellitus type 1, and offers hope and support to others who may be struggling. Asha has spoken on the family panel at NEDA, at the Park Nicolette Melrose Center, JDRF, Diabetes Sisters, and numerous other organizations. Asha's published articles can be found online at Diabetes Health, Diabetes Daily, Glue, D-Life, Diabetes Mind, and many other diabetes-related websites. Her passion for connecting people to the help they deserve is unrelentless as she continues to establish relationships with eating disorder treatment facilities across the country. So thank you so much for joining us today, Asha. I'm thrilled to have you here as your bio is long, impressive, and more than anything, genuinely what this world needs. So thank you for joining us today. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Danielle. I'm doing well, and that's one could never hope for a better introduction than you just gave me. So thank you.
Hey, you gave us all this stuff. I just said it. You're the one who actually did it. So we're all very grateful for that. So what we usually do here is we like to get into kind of the real story, the real stuff, and love to hear your story from how you got to where you are today from where you started in the beginning.
Sure. Well, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 5, and my dad already had type 1 diabetes. He was diagnosed in 1970 when, there was very, very primitive technology, well, really barely any technology. He shared, he would sterilize his needle, one needle that he had for, weeks. And so when they started to see the signs and symptoms of type 1 in me, they, immediately took me to the doctor. It was pretty quick diagnosis. I didn't spend any time in the hospital. I came home and started getting shots. And I remember being fairly upset the first night, but then after that it was so normal. So type 1 diabetes, I barely remember a life before it, and it was such a normal way of life, and it didn't bother me. I was a very loquacious and confident little child, so I didn't have an issue, teaching people about it or telling my teachers that I needed a snack. But all of that kind of changed in middle school, and then definitely the transition to high school, because I was a teenage girl. And, we have hormones changing. We all of a sudden have a lot of self-doubt. Friendships change. Just there's so much going on. And I should also mention I've been performing professionally in film and on stage since I was 6 years old. And so, when I started doing a lot of on-stage theater in high school especially, I was now very aware that I needed to make sure my diabetes never prevented me from being on stage or missing a cue. And I started to get a lot of anxiety about my diabetes in general, and worrying that it would make me seem less than, worrying that, if I got sick or had a low on stage or something happened because of my diabetes, that then maybe I wouldn't be in the next show. I just started to get really anxious about it. So along with that, I was diagnosed with hypothyroid by the time I was 7 or 8. I was diagnosed with PCOS, which is polycystic ovary syndrome, by the time I was 16. So I had a lot of autoimmune conditions, and even though the internet wasn't as accessible for research back in the early 90s, what I did hear about any of these conditions was poorly offered information from the media, and it went a little bit like, oh, PCOS is due to insulin resistance and tends to happen in overweight women, and I was like, but I'm a teenage girl, I'm not overweight. And then I would hear that hypothyroid, the signs and symptoms are heavy set people. So there was poorly offered information, and it started to churn in my young teenage brain and made me very scared that I actually had no control over my body. up until then, I did understand that diabetes, got first, experience and everything, that taking care of my type 1 diabetes was sometimes more important than what I wanted as a teenage girl. And I started to put all this stuff together and got very angry about it. And I felt cheated. And I knew how much I wanted to perform, and it was really the only thing that gave me an escape away from worrying about everyday problems, and I didn't want diabetes to take that away from me either. So I thought the best thing to do would be to keep my blood sugar slightly elevated all the time so I'd never have a low blood sugar. And it was around that time that I read an article in a very prominent magazine for diabetics. I won't name the name of it because they should be ashamed. There was an article in the teen section, and it was just this little snippet that said, a lot of type 1 diabetics are skipping their insulin to lose weight. It is very dangerous. They lose weight very quickly. There's very rapid results, but don't do it. Yeah. And I was like, well, there's an idea. And I remember that a little bit after that, I went and, raided my brother's Halloween candy, ate it all, didn't take insulin, and fell into like a fairly close to coma state. And I unfortunately continued with that behavior. Unfortunately, that article kind of was the last straw of an eating disorder that was already brewing. So by the time I was 14 and 15, this stuff was happening, and then I was diagnosed with PCOS, which, again, was this solidifying event that told me that I would have to take control of my body, because on its own, my body would totally fall apart. So I was not properly educated. None of the providers, of the many providers that I saw, ever gave me credible, important information about how to have any emotional competency to take care of this stuff. So I felt very lost, ignored, and I had this sense that it didn't really matter what my concerns were about being a young woman who is a performer. It didn't really matter because my health came first, and that, again, continued to cause me to rebel. So I moved very quickly into omitting insulin almost all the time, and that continued for about a decade. There were periods where I would get very scared because I'd be very close to DKA, and so I would, take a little bit more insulin for a while, but when you reintroduce insulin into the body, your body swells because it's like, oh my gosh, yay, nutrition, and it gets really, really swollen, and to someone who already has an eating disorder, that's not helpful, very scary. So that was always the tipping point for me going back to my dangerous behaviors. So, it was a secret that I hid from everyone and that I was very much in denial about. And it wasn't until I started really losing opportunities in my life and then almost lost my husband that I realized that it really was time for me to get help for this, and that I'd spent years trying to get help myself, and it wasn't working. And I was now at a point where I needed professional help.
There are so many things that you said in there that I want to comment on. I'm going to even try to cover half of them. But what you said, I mean, so many people, young girls and young boys nowadays, have, I think, a couple of things. One is that once you have one autoimmune disease, I think it's very more common that you are getting another one. And a lot of times the thyroid situation, Hashimoto's, is now becoming a lot more prevalent, and things like PCOS, these things can go hand in hand, and that happening to us does kind of give us the feeling that we are in some way defective, and that we need to have some level of control over what's happening. And like you said, and what you did is that you took that control, but in a destructive way. And I think that it's so important that you do share that, and I thank you for sharing that, because you can, I can't even imagine how many people are out there who are literally sitting in this situation right now, feeling exactly what you were feeling back then, even when we do have the internet now, because all that poorly worded information that you were getting back then, now it's available tenfold, 20-fold, 100-fold, and it's still just as poorly worded and ignorantly worded. And I say ignorant in such a way that the people who are writing it, unfortunately, most of the time are not diabetic themselves and don't actually understand what it's like to feel these feelings of worrying about it. Is our bodies are betraying us, or are we going to lose opportunities in life because our diabetes or any one of our autoimmune disorders are kind of pushing us back from where we want to be. So I hope that people out there that are hearing this are understanding that it's not hopeless. You're not helpless, and there are very healthy alternatives to getting yourself together, like you said, because that's really kind of where it all stems from. So thank you for sharing all that, and please tell us more about kind of where you are now and kind of what all of that struggle had led you to or has led you to now.
Sure. I'm glad to hear you reiterate it. And I think the most important thing that I have learned now, and that it continues to, this theory continues to prove itself to me, is that, I wish that there was a bigger emphasis on how possible it actually is to be able to do whatever you want, no matter how many chronic illnesses you have. But it takes a little creativity, and it takes thinking out of the box, and it takes you being your own self-advocate. So I learned a lot of amazing skills, and I regained my genetic self-confidence. My father's a great example. Again, he just does what he wants, and he's a professional photographer, he's a father, he's an art history professor. He just does all this stuff, and he just manages his diabetes, and doesn't apologize for it. So I relearned how to have that type of personality again, which is what I was raised with. And it made me realize that I was feeling apologetic all the time about stuff that wasn't my fault. And, the dooming consequences of having all these autoimmune diseases, meaning that it doesn't, you're just never going to be normal, and you're never going to have a healthy body size, and you just might as well give up. All that information, it is still out there, but it is poorly worded. It is not true, and I am a perfect example of that. My body went through a lot of changes during treatment, but I'm now back at the same body size that I was basically as a teenager before I started having an eating disorder. And I eat a lot of food. I am a very active person. I take a lot of insulin, and but I do it all very mindfully, and I'm very much in tune with how my body works. And no two type 1s are the same. I know you know that too. Our hormones are all different. The fact that I have PCOS adds more hormonal stuff. So I've learned that instead of getting angry and giving up, when something is going awry in my body, I, much like Ginger Vieira says, I do a diabetes, experiment, a science experiment, and I look at the different factors that could be affecting it, and I continue to adjust. And type 1 diabetes teaches you how to be a very flexible person, whether you like it or not. And, I feel very, very appreciative that I'm still alive and well enough to be able to enjoy my personality and be able to enjoy my life despite 10 years of living in a very dark place. And, after treatment, I took baby steps to reintegrate diabetes management back into my life, and about 2.5 years into my solid recovery, my husband told me that he had bought me a domain name called wearediabetes.org, and he's an IT guy, so he buys domain names all the time just for fun.
I have to just
interject. Your husband an IT too?
Asha and I just met for the first time not 10 minutes before this interview started, so she doesn't know this, but my husband is also an IT guy. He is my tech guy. He's the one who bought diabetesdominator.com before, and I was Diabetes Dominator before it was my company, because that was the persona that I had to embody to kind of take control of my actions that were the ones that were kind of leading me to having, a binge eating problem. And he bought that domain for me before I even had this business. So that's really crazy.
Funny. Yeah, I love it. Oh my God, we have good husbands. But yeah, he said, I bought this for you when you were in treatment, and I figured maybe you'd write a blog or something. There's a lot of people writing blogs, and I was like, I don't like writing at all. Like, I am a talker. I write because I have to, but I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm in a blog. Like, I'm not a good writer. I'm a speaker. I'm a people person. And he was like, well, maybe you should just start something about, what you went through and help other people. And I'm like, oh, maybe. But, at that point, I was really still pursuing a performing career, and I was quite busy with that. And so I got connected to my co-founder through some of the staff at the Melrose Center, and she and I clicked right away, and we started to realize that there was a horrible lack of education and resources about anyone who has type 1 diabetes, who has, whether it's a full-blown eating disorder or disordered behavior, and we were like, well, this is terrible. So we just decided somebody had to do it, and maybe it was going to be me. So, you know, my co-founder, Erin, has supported me through the whole thing while also going through almost done with that. And we thought very carefully about the resources we would have on this website, and we were very cautious to offer information that was essential without it being triggering or a how-to for other people going to this website. And that is, I think, the most that's the thing that we have so much trepidation about. I think talking about this topic is not being so detailed that you might be teaching someone else how to engage in these behaviors, but you also have to be clear enough so that people go, whoa, that is me. I'm listening to this and I do that too. So we took our time, but when we launched the website, things just kind of hit the ground running, and we've just kept making connections and building partnerships and helping people get the help that they need, and that's the biggest, most important thing.
Absolutely, and the diabetes community is super lucky to have you and your whole team and resources like you available, and that's actually one of the biggest kind of outcomes that I'm after doing these interviews, is to show people out there that we are a big community, that we are out there and we're available, and it's not just you that's suffering. We've all gone through some serious suffering, and we all can come out on the other end, whether you've been able to come out on the other end or not yet, but we're here to help you do that. And you're not alone, and your voice does matter, and everybody wants to hear your voice, even if you feel that your voice is not important. And a lot of us, I mean, I know me personally, I just considered myself defective and unimportant, and that's why I treated myself so poorly. And a lot of, I think, even if you're not younger, I mean, you could be 40, 50, 60 years old and still have that mentality, but you have to know that we're out here, and, you know, Asha's got a whole website dedicated to that. I also do that, and we're just two people of a huge community, and there's always room for more, and so I'm so grateful that you're out here sharing that. And you brought up so many good points. Again, I just like to touch back on them, is that being your own scientist. I am a nerd. I graduated school, my top 20. I was a straight A student. Because I was so introverted as a child, all I wanted to do was learn and read, because I was embarrassed to go out, and I was really overweight, and so I kind of buried my face in books, and I became okay with being a science experiment as I got older, and I think it's cool now. And it's like, for me, just something happened the other day. I just posted about it. It's like, you know, I'm actually now an athlete that works out 6-7 days a week, and I'm kind of like super committed to it. But, you know, going to a workout like CrossFit or any workout, I see a lot of people out there struggling with getting their blood sugars in a certain range or keeping it in a certain range. I mean, I started my workout at 138, and I ended within 20 minutes. I was at 286. But you know what? In the old me from 15 years ago, I would have lost my mind and just buried my sorrows in a box of Oreos and cried about it. But the new me just says, you know what? I'm going to go bolus, and I'm going to go check out what went on today. Was there anything out of the norm? And actually there wasn't. And, you know, not to be TMI, but for even women out there, it's like, look, I was coming up on that time of month. I realized that, and sometimes your hormones just go crazy. And sometimes when you exercise, your body, not knowing that you're not getting enough insulin at all, thinks that you need glucagon or cortisol to help you through your workout, when we really don't need that. But our pancreases still do produce some insulin or some glucagon, and so it could have been a million things. But instead of getting upset about it, I said, you know what? Let me check out the evidence. Let me retrace my steps, and let me bolus and move forward. And that's kind of the mentality that we have to have, the one that you were talking about. We all have the ability to have that mentality. We just kind of have to step into that power of choice, because it is a choice, but we have to make that choice for ourselves. So thank you.
I completely agree. I think I definitely had to choose to recover, because there were so many reasons why I could have picked to not recover, because change of any type is very uncomfortable, and who wants to be uncomfortable, you know, and who wants to be confused, and, you know, just nobody wants to be uncomfortable, especially for people who've already felt like, well, I already deal with type 1 diabetes, I shouldn't have to deal with this either. So it's a choice to pursue information in a different way.
Or it's kind of like that cliche that people always say, but maybe it's cliche for a reason, is that all change that is positive happens outside of your comfort zone. It's like nobody wants to be uncomfortable, but you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to get to be something different, to get different results. It's like I call it growing pains. That's also that. I mean, that's a real thing. You have to be in pain to grow to a new level. Like, it's just part of life.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So awesome. So, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to share before I ask you to give us some tips for our viewers out there? Anything else that you'd like to tell us about anything you're working on or that you're doing or that you'd just like to share with anybody out there watching who might be struggling or anything at all? Because this is open forum.
Yeah, there's two things. One, it is National Eating Disorder Awareness Week, so it's, you know, kind of cool that we're chatting now. I know this won't be out, you know, it'll be out way later down the road, but, you know, every week for me is National Eating Disorder Awareness Week because I talk about it all the time. But I just, for anyone out there that is struggling, you know, people may have read the articles out there. I've written some. Other people in the community have written amazing ones. Christelle recently had an article, you know, where she shared her personal story. You know, there's information out there, thank God. But there is a wide range of eating disordered symptoms and behaviors that type 1 diabetics experience. And just because yours don't fit the diabulimia mold or an anorexic mold, that doesn't mean that your stuff isn't valid and it isn't concerning and that it isn't dangerous. It is. Even if you're not messing with your diabetes management, what kind of life are you living if half of your brain or even more is revolving around food and eating disordered behaviors? That isn't fair. That isn't a life to live. So for anyone out there, I want to encourage you to have the confidence and the investment in your future self to reach out to me or, you know, Danielle, if that's more comfortable, anyone. But there are resources out there. You know, half of my job is filling our database with providers from, you know, statewide areas that, you know, our therapists, that are our counselors, you know, eating disorder treatment centers, even endos that have had experience with more than one client. So there are resources out there, and all I want to do is help and connect people to the help that they need. So whether you're struggling with insulin omission or something else, let somebody know, because there are resources out there to help you.
You know, one thing I want to add, and actually I've never shared this out on an interview or anything, but even if someone in your life, if you're younger and there's a parent, I actually went, one of my clients who's a very dear friend of mine now, she was switching pumps, and there was a pump education class that I went to with her, and the pump educator actually told us a story about one person that she had dealt with, a family, and it was a mother and 2 children, and both of her children, they were twins, and a boy and a girl, and they both had type 1 diabetes, and the mother would encourage the children to compete to see who could have the lowest hemoglobin A1C, and they lived their lives with blood sugars in the 50s and 60s, and luckily the pump educator saw this, and the mother shared this as something that she was proud of. And so even if you have an authority figure that may be encouraging this type of disorder of any type, which obviously you have to have some type of eating disorder if you're not eating or over bolusing constantly, you need to reach out, even if you feel like you may be defying some other type of authority in your life, because there are adults out there who can help. And that also,
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I have a lot of age 19 to 21 girls, and some guys too, reaching out, and their parents try to get involved with me too, and we do a very good job of, you know, catering to the client first before the family. But I will say 50% of those cases are that the parents have very, very strange ideals of how one must manage their type 1 diabetes, and they have put this pressure on their teen or, you know, child, and it has absolutely been one of the largest factors in creating this eating disorder. So it is very important to know that you're not tattling, but your well-being is more important, you know, than a parent getting upset. It's just so much more important, and you don't need to worry about protecting anybody. You know, there are resources out there.
Yourself, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said there was one other thing that you wanted to share.
Oh yeah. Well, we recently started this new project called T1 TV, and so it's available on YouTube. We post about it sometimes on Facebook, and I just already made a note, Danielle, that I want to interview you for T1 TV. But it's a network that is simply for type 1 diabetics, and we're just going to cover a lot of different topics, and it's going to be information that is specific to the T1 community, because I think oftentimes, because the type 1 diabetic percentage is a lot smaller than the overall diabetes population, the people that reach out to me definitely feel a little ignored. And within the diabetes community in general, we're all the same. We all love and respect each other, and we get it. But the outside world, not so much. So the T1 TV is also for family, friends. It's also for providers. So it's just an educational tool, as well as just offering insight and advice, to our community about certain topics. So I encourage anyone who's watching this to check it out on YouTube. It's also on Vimeo. Currently, we have programs on type 1 diabetes and marriage, and how that is different than a marriage without type 1 diabetes.
Absolutely.
We have a couple different segments on that. We have one about eating disorders and type 1 diabetes. We have one with Scott Johnson on diabetes burnout, and there's just lots more in the works.
Awesome. So yeah, just for anybody who's watching, don't worry about running to get a pen, or every single link that she has mentioned that has any link back to her or anything that Asha is doing, I'm going to have posted underneath this video in the YouTube content area, so everything will just be a click away. So don't even worry about missing anything. Just scroll down. That's all. So yeah, no problem. So as I always ask towards the end of the interview, I like to ask what your personal top three tips are for people who are out there who are struggling, who do have that kind of hopeless and helpless feeling that we have all had or continue to have at some points, and how you kind of can tell them they can overcome that, or at least work on it.
Sure. There's a lot of big concepts that that sometimes are helpful, but they're not like tangible. So I think for someone who, and I'm going to talk about this in regards to someone who may just be struggling overall, not specifically with an eating disorder, because sometimes it's good for my brain to try to think about other things than eating disorders and diabetes. But one thing that I realized quite quickly as I moved into relearning how to manage my diabetes is that being prepared is the most important thing. And so I used to carry a small purse with some glucose tabs. But when I really started integrating insulin back into my body, sometimes I got low enough that I needed more than glucose tabs. So my purse progressively became larger and larger. And as I got busier and more capable in my life, I now have a backpack. And it's not cute, but it's functional. And so my first tip is that always assume when you're out, you're going to get low. And then to add to that, assume you're going to get low twice. Because,
I love it.
And what I also do, along with healthy low BG snacks, I prefer glucose tabs initially to treat, and then I have dried fruit if it's like, if I can, if my Dexcom's still going down and I can tell it's going to be bad. So, I've got, some healthy carb choices for that, but I also bring, with the kind of lifestyle I lead, it's not uncommon for me to be gone for 10 to 12 hours during a day, so I always have nuts, I always have healthy source of protein, Yes.
I was actually just going to bring these. This is what I use to treat lows, especially on the go. These are Level Life glucose gel packets, and you can see, like, I don't care if you're running, jogging, this is so thin. This can go anywhere, and I can have like 3 or 4 of them in a bag, and they work super quick. So they have these at Target, I think Walmart, like they're available, Amazon. I actually order mine on Amazon, so I agree. Yeah, so.
I order so much food from Amazon. It's I consume it all over a couple of months. But, so I think it's just be prepared. And you know what? It can be that. It can be whatever you want. My best friend likes to use chocolate chips. So, everybody's got their thing. And as long as you have it and you restock it, if you've gotten low that day, restock your supplies as soon as you get home. The first thing I do when I walk in the door is I go through my backpack, okay, what did I use today? What do I need to put back in? Because I'm not going to remember at 6 in the morning.
Yeah.
So first tip is assume you're going to get low, and actually assume you're going to get low twice. The second one, and this really does go a little bit more into the emotional component, is that we cannot assume that our loved ones have any idea what we're going through unless we talk about it.
That is a fantastic point. And before you even go any further, I want to say one other thing about that as it relates to life in general. We all have our own blueprint that we have kind of molded ourselves into, our values, our morals, our expectations of ourselves. And sometimes we as human beings project our expectations onto other people and expect them to live up to them when we have never once communicated to that person who has a completely different blueprint of life, has no idea what ours is, and we expect them to live up to that. Now, this is not just diabetes related, this is but diabetes specifically. Without telling people what you hope for them to do or expect of them to do, you cannot get angry at them if they do not do it. So that is like one of my life mottos.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And when you're assuming that someone else can assume about you, you get into this ridiculous undercurrent of assumptions when absolutely nothing has actually been said. No words have come out of the mouth. And, I learned from, strained relationships with family members that, like you said, somebody else's blueprint and expectations may be very different than your own. No one's is the same. And I had realized in treatment that I had never once shared my anger, sorrow, regret, grudges about living with this very demanding chronic illness. And it was time for me to start mourning the difficulties and then figuring out how to take care of it. And so now I'm very vocal, whether, it's at my job or if it's, with my in-laws when staying there for a week in their home and they don't ever eat or think about food. So I'm like, I need to go to the grocery store now. Goodbye. Instead of assuming that people are thinking about my needs as a type 1 diabetic, I don't give them even time to assume. I tell them what I need. And I don't do it in a bossy manner. I just say, this is what I need to do to take care of myself, so that I don't miss a blip. I just keep going and maintain my health. And usually people are like, oh, thank you. Yeah, good. I didn't even think about that. Right. And of course they don't think about it. So that's tip number 2, is that you can't assume that people know what you need without, saying it. The last tip, I almost forgot it.
That's okay. Take your time. Honestly,
I was so ready to go.
That's it. That's the good thing about this. People, we're real people too. We're not. This is not staged or planned. This is literally flying by the seat of our pants. We're not scripting this, so this is real.
Oh, I remember now. This is a tip I gave at a speech to a JDRF group a couple years ago, and it wasn't even something that I thought about until it just came out of my mouth. But we all need to have something that has nothing to do with diabetes that just makes us happy and feel like we're at home. And it's very important for me now, actually, because I run a nonprofit that relates to diabetes, and it's very important that I have time to do some activity or pursue some passion that has nothing to do with diabetes, has nothing to do with calculating numbers. And we all need to protect that passion and make time for it, even if it's once a month. So, for me, I love going to thrift stores. I don't even buy things that often, but I like to wander around and get kind of zoned out, and I like to look at all the crap on the shelves and be like, where did this come from? Like, why did someone initially buy this clown clock, and how did it get here? I love it. It must be my theatrical background. I love stories. So I just zone out, and then after like 45 minutes, I'm like, well, I'm done, and I just go, and I feel really refreshed. It's very strange. So, and I realize that I can't judge that. Who cares? I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just kind of disappearing for a while into a thrift store, and once in a while, I find an awesome thing that is $5. So, who can argue with that? But I think whatever it is, you have to protect it, and you have to give yourself time to do it. Even if it's like, oh, I'm just going to be lazy and watch the Flintstones all day Saturday, do it, because if it makes you happy and it gives you time to recharge, then that is the most important thing.
I agree. I mean, honestly, recharging, people don't do that enough regardless of even being diabetic. But when you are diabetic, it's obviously you can't like go on a vacation from diabetes. Like no matter where you go, even in the thrift store, if your blood sugar gets low, you're going to have to treat it. But the point is that you're allowing your mind to not completely focus on it. And for me, it's traveling, or even if I can't travel, it's planning a trip. Like I could sit down and like look at like different resorts, or like look at different, I'll even look at, even if I'm not going for like a year and a half, like just sitting down and looking at stuff, like planning it out in my mind.
Yeah.
I could do that for easily 45 minutes and get lost in it. It's like, nourish your passion, whatever it is, give it to the world, because the world needs it, even if it's not diabetes related.
Right.
Literally, like, there's some person out there that's making money off of, like, teaching horses to tap dance. I'm not even joking.
Right. Oh,
So,
I'm sure there is. Yeah.
like, so it's like whatever your passion is and you feel passionate about it, share it with the world. Don't let diabetes be the reason why you're not going to, because there are some people out there that are wanting whatever it is that you are passionate about and know more about than they do. So I agree with that 100%. Do that. So yeah, I mean, thank you so much. This has been probably just as uplifting for me as it is probably for the people out there watching. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me about diabetes stuff, because we all kind of need to hear about it from other people instead of just all this going on in here all the time.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Well, thank you.
No, thank you. And like I said, I'm going to post all of Asha's links underneath the video. Go check her out at wearediabetes.org. I'm going to give her Facebook, her Twitter, if she wants me to do that. I didn't ask her about that, but I'll give all that information as well. And you can follow her and like her and all that stuff, because we all have to come together and kind of stick together and band together and be a team. We're all on the same team, and let's play nice, and let's kick diabetes in the butt where it belongs, and take control of our actions. And I'll see you all in the next video. So thank you very much, Asha.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.